Lesson 9 probably wasn't too difficult, right? Dedupe and text to columns, pretty simple. And I even led you on a bit of a wild goose chase. I apologize. Now, lesson 10, we start looking at Vlookup. If pivot tables are one of the things that differentiate the pro from the amateur in Excel, then Vlookup also differentiates between professional and amateurs in Excel and Sheets. In this lesson, we're going to dive into Vlookup, and we're only doing it in Sheets because there's a replacement command for Excel that we'll cover in lesson 12. But all you Excel people should follow along because you will run into Vlookup at some point and the commands that we cover in lesson 11 also. So the examples will be in Sheets, but the functionality is identical between Sheets and Excel in this. All right, let's dive in. Let's have fun. Lesson 10 in the Excel and Sheets for Marketers class. We continue in part 3, examining the different lookup functions that are available in Excel and Sheets. In this lesson, we have one thing we're going to cover, and that's Vlookup. It's a very powerful command, so powerful that it even showed up in my Twitter feed recently. Nick Eubanks, who's an SEO guy in Philadelphia that I followed for a long time, had a great tweet recently. Want to 10x your digital marketing skills? Get really familiar with spreadsheet formulas. Vlookup and pivot tables. So much power in such simple formulas. Vlookup and pivot tables. Well, that's pretty cool because we finished pivot tables and now we're going to be looking at Vlookup. And some other guy, Brian Chavez, whom I actually don't know, but he said, I don't know what I would do without Vlookup formula, MS Excel. So we're going to dive into Vlookup in this lesson. And this lesson is going to be specifically in Sheets because actually there's a new and improved version of Vlookup for Excel. It's called XLookup. And we're going to have our very own lesson just on XLookup. If you have an older version of Excel, you may run into Vlookup and index and match, which is what we'll cover in the next lesson. So follow along if you're an Excel person. You'll probably run into Vlookup at some point. It's good to understand what it does, but you'll love XLookup when we get to it. So let's dive into the spreadsheet. Here's the spreadsheet we're going to be using. This is data that is downloaded from Google Analytics for the Google Merchandise Store. We have 4 quarters worth of data with the page name, the page title, page views, page value, etc. In a previous lesson, we got the page names, and what we're shooting for is a sheet that looks like this, where we're going to have the page name, the page title, the page views from each of the quarters. We're going to do a spark line, and then the page value from each of the quarters. And we're going to do much of this based on the page name itself and the Vlookup command. Before we get into the Vlookup command itself, let me talk about what we're going to do. The one thing that's unique in this whole final spreadsheet that we're trying to get to is the page name, which we have here. And I realize this is really the URI. I'm just going to call it the page name to be consistent throughout this lesson. What we're going to do is look for Google Redesign Office, for example, in each of the quarters. If we look in quarter 4, it'll show up here. We're going to then look across and find the page title, the page views, and the page value. That's what the Vlookup command will let us do. Let's start the process and start getting from this sheet to this sheet. The first thing we're going to do is duplicate this page. Let's rename it. And let's do some formatting to the spreadsheet. Let's add the first column we want to get. And now we're going to start using the Vlookup command. We'll start typing, and I want to show you what the Vlookup command looks like. There are a couple of things I want to point out. So as we said, the first thing is what is it going to look for? In this case, it's going to be the page. Where is it going to look? The range is going to be Q4. The column is going to be where in Q4. So it's going to look here in this whole spreadsheet, and the column is going to be 2. It's going to be the second column over. And then finally, the sheet that we are pulling this from is not sorted. It's in really random order. So we don't want it to be true. We want it to be false. And that's one thing that is the same in Excel as well. They call it something different, exact match versus approximate match. But it's going to be false in most cases, even though the default is true. Before we start building the formula, I want to do one more thing, and that is to bring up the named ranges I already have in this spreadsheet. I have a named range for Q1, for Q2, Q3, Q4, and that'll be useful in this formula. You'll see in a little bit. We'll go to Data, Named Ranges, and we'll have them there available. No more procrastinating. Let's dive into the formula. The search key is going to be the page name. The range, I know what the names of my ranges are. So if I type a Q, I get a list of them. So we're going to do Q4 table. The index is going to be column 2. And because the Q4 table is not sorted alphabetically, we will say false here. There we have it, our very first page title. The first time I do a VLOOKUP, I always like to make sure that I've got it correct. So let's verify that on our own. Let's go to Q4 and look for Google Redesign Office. We've done that before. That's this row. And if I go over, the page title is Office Google Merchandise Store. That appears to be working great. We are in business. Let's copy that formula down to the next one. Oh my goodness, we have an error. What the heck could be going on? Well, there's several things that could be going on, but basically it's telling us that in this Q4 table, there is no page name called Google Redesign Apparel Men's Shirts. And that's certainly possible. That product may have existed in Q1 or Q2, but not Q4. We know we don't want an error to show up. We don't want that ugly hashtag NA to show up. So let's put some error trapping around our formula. And this is a great skill to learn how to do. The error trapping we're going to do is called if NA. So it's looking for that error, that NA error. And if we find that error, we're going to say something like not found. So now we actually have an informative error message, which is way better than that ugly NA. But there are many other types of errors other than NA, or not available. A broader formula to use for error checking is if error. So what's going on with the if error or if NA? What it's basically saying is if error, if this formula produces an error, instead of displaying that error, display not found in Q4. If it doesn't display an error, then just go ahead and display whatever is in there. That's a great tip to use to error-proof your formulas. Really good best practice there. Let's copy that formula up. And now let's bring this down the whole way. There we go. We have our titles across the board. You'll notice that there are quite a few page titles that weren't found in Q4. If you really wanted to get specific on this, you could go back into Q3 or Q2 or Q1 and find the page title. But for our purposes, let's leave it the way it is. Now that we've done one VLOOKUP, the next part will be easy. What we're going to do is get the page views from Q1 through Q4 and the page value for Q1 through Q4 using the Vlookup command. Let me build the in-process sheet out. There, that looks a little closer to what our final one is like. Let's set up the Vlookup now for the page views for Q1. If we wanted to, we could jump over to the Q1 and see what column that's in. Page views is column 3, so that'll be helpful to know. Great. We have that set up. Can we copy it over to Q2, Q3, Q4? Well, there's a couple things that'll stop us from doing that. One is it's referencing A3, and if I copy this over, we get another error. So we haven't done our error yet, but also it's now referencing B3, and we want to keep it in column A3, right? So let's get rid of that error there. And what we want to do is make our formula. We want to lock column A. We also want to put an if error around that. And this time, rather than typing in not found or whatever, since these are numbers, let's put in a 0. So now can we copy it? Yeah, that works. No errors. However, we're still referencing Q1 rather than Q2, so we're just going to have to change that and copy this over and change these formulas. Perfect. Let's do the same thing with the page value. So let's go to one of our spreadsheets and see which column page value is. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's the 9th column. So what I would do here, copy those over, and I can even do a find and replace. Replace column 3, replace that with the 9th column, and search within formulas, replace all, replace 4 instances of 3 with 9, which is what we want. And there we have the page value. Let's get it out to 2 decimal places because this is a dollar figure. Let's close the named ranges. We don't need those anymore. And let's copy these formulas all the way down. We don't have this page looking quite like our final version yet, but it's getting much closer. We filled this out quite nicely, all through the power of Vlookup. Recapping, we spent this whole lesson on Vlookup, and Nick Eubanks would be very proud of us because now we've done pivot tables and we've done Vlookup, a super powerful function. We also got introduced to if error, which I love. I hate having error messages show up in spreadsheets, whether it's that hashtag NA or hashtag error or some other error. I don't like that. And the if error command makes sure that we control what the error condition looks like, what the error message looks like. So that's a great takeaway from this lesson. As usual, you have the spreadsheet to work with, and let me highly encourage you to make it your own. Play with the Vlookup. Once you understand the concept, it's actually fairly simple. Make it a part of your repertoire. See you in the next lesson.